What happens when a man achieves success but fails to govern himself? Solomon and Bill Gates reached the top in different eras, yet they faced the same test: discipline, clarity, and inner limits. This video is not about wealth. It is about the kind of success that elevates and the warning that almost no one teaches. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel to go deeper on this journey. Now, let's get to what truly matters. When we look at history calmly, a simple question emerges. Why do some men reach great influence, while others, equally talented, lose their way along the path? The answer is rarely luck. It almost always begins with how each man governs himself. This is where Solomon and Bill Gates meet, despite the distance between their eras. Both understood that true power is born in the mind, not in force. Solomon appears in the biblical tradition as the man who asked for wisdom before asking for anything else. This detail, studied by theologians, philosophers, and historians, reveals something essential about responsibility. He knew that decisions shape destinies. To govern people, resources, or systems without inner clarity is to open the door to errors that demand a high price later on. That is why his writings insist on conscious choices and on accepting consequences without escape. Bill Gates emerges centuries later in a world ruled by technology and speed. Even so, his success follows a similar logic. Researchers of innovation and biographers recognize that his main strength was strategic clarity. Gates realized early that software would become the invisible foundation of modern life. Instead of chasing fame or immediate recognition, he focused on building structures that would support millions of daily decisions around the world. What these two men share is not wealth, but mental discipline. Both operated with prolonged focus, refusing easy distractions. This kind of posture demands self-mastery, widely studied in modern psychology as a central factor of emotional maturity. Men who do not control their impulses become prisoners of addictions, whether visible or silent. Solomon warned about this when speaking of the human heart. Gates, in interviews and writings, has acknowledged the importance of consistent habits to preserve focus and clarity. Another decisive element is purpose. Neither of them worked merely to accumulate. Solomon saw his role as service to a people. Gates devoted a large part of his life to projects of social and scientific impact. In both cases, work gained meaning because it was connected to something greater than personal ego. Studies on leadership confirm that a clear purpose reduces destructive behaviors and strengthens responsible decision-making. This comparison is not meant to create idols. It serves as a mirror. Success can elevate a man, but it also exposes him. The greater the influence, the greater the need for inner consistency. Without it, power begins to exact a silent price. The first lesson is clear: no external system compensates for the lack of inner governance. This is where the warning begins, one that few teach, but that defines who remains whole over time. For the average man, this reflection is practical. It is not about reaching extreme positions, but about taking daily responsibility for one's own choices. Clarity prevents repeated mistakes. Discipline sustains progress. Self-knowledge prevents unnecessary falls. When these foundations fail, consequences appear sooner or later. History shows that true success begins within and only then manifests outward in personal life. When examined closely, wisdom is not an abstract concept. It reveals itself in how a man decides under pressure. Historians such as Paul Johnson remind us that enduring leaders were those capable of maintaining clarity even in unstable environments. Solomon understood this early. His writings insist that choices shape consequences, and that ignoring this link produces inner disorder before any external collapse. In the modern world, scholars of strategic management identify a similar pattern in Bill Gates. Research on Microsoft highlights his operational discipline and prolonged focus on a few essential objectives. This posture reflects a long-term, masculine mindset in which consistency outweighs momentary impulses. Wisdom, in this sense, appears as the ability to say no to distractions that erode purpose. Philosophers like Aristotle already affirmed that virtue is born from habit. Contemporary psychologists reinforce the same idea when addressing self-mastery. Without daily discipline, a man becomes a hostage to addictions. Among them, pornography occupies a silent place, studied by researchers such as Philip Zimbardo, who associate excessive consumption with loss of focus and emotional immaturity. Overcoming such habits requires personal responsibility and clarity about what strengthens or weakens practical life. Solomon addressed this directly by warning that an undisciplined heart leads to poor choices. He was not speaking of moralism, but of human functioning. Gates, in turn, has consistently defended rigorous routines of reading and deep work. Self-knowledge, in this sense, is not empty introspection, but a constant alignment between intention and action. Another central point is purpose. Historian Niall Ferguson observes that societies advance when leaders connect personal ambition to collective goals. Solomon saw himself as a guardian of a people. Gates directed resources and energy toward global challenges, seeking measurable impact. In both, purpose served as a filter for difficult decisions. Emotional maturity appears when a man accepts limits. It is expressed in the ability to recognize mistakes without self-destruction and to correct course with consistency. Studies on adult development show that emotionally stable men do not flee consequences. They learn from them. This posture reduces relapses into addiction and strengthens focus. Researchers in moral education affirm that clarity grows when routine and values move together. Without focus, a scattered mind creates shortcuts and justifies falls. Daily consistency, even when discreet, strengthens character. This process demands simple, repeated choices and attention to real consequences. Mature men learn to abandon habits that drain energy and to invest time in practices that expand discipline, purpose, and responsibility. In this way, growth remains stable over the years, supported by continuous, real focus. Throughout history, scholars have observed that success is rarely neutral. It always transforms the one who achieves it. Historian Arnold Toynbee noted that civilizations do not collapse solely due to external factors, but because of internal failures of character and direction. This idea helps explain why Solomon and Bill Gates represent not only examples of ascent, but also points of warning. Success can elevate when guided by wisdom, but it exacts a price when it encounters no inner limits. Solomon described this phenomenon with uncommon clarity. In his texts, he associates prosperity with continuous responsibility. Wisdom for him was not a trophy won once, but a daily practice. When discipline weakens, choices become careless and consequences accumulate. This logic appears repeatedly in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, books analyzed by philosophers such as Søren Kierkegaard, who saw in them a profound reflection on the emptiness that arises when a man loses his inner axis. In the modern world, Bill Gates achieved a different kind of success, yet faced similar challenges. Scholars of economic sociology highlight that his influence grew faster than any traditional structure of control. This demands above-average emotional maturity. Without self-mastery, intellectual power tends to generate isolation or rigidity. Gates demonstrated awareness of this risk by stepping away from direct management of Microsoft and reorganizing priorities, seeking clarity of purpose and impact. A mature masculine mindset recognizes that growth without self-knowledge produces fragility. Developmental psychologists affirm that men who ignore their limitations tend to seek compensation through addictions. Among them, pornography stands out as a silent habit that compromises focus, discipline, and consistency. Neuroscience studies show that frequent consumption alters patterns of attention and reward, weakening the self-control necessary for responsible decisions. Overcoming this type of addiction does not depend on extreme rhetoric, but on conscious choices repeated over time. Solomon warned that excess is never a sign of strength. He wrote that a wise man learns when to say enough. This idea echoes in Stoic thought, especially in Seneca, who argued that the man who does not master himself will never be free. Gates, in interviews, has also emphasized the importance of clear limits to preserve focus and mental energy. In both cases, we see the understanding that discipline protects success rather than limiting it. Another key point is consistency. Historians of science remind us that lasting advances rarely arise from isolated acts. They are born from the repetition of correct choices over time. Solomon built stability because he maintained standards. Gates consolidated influence because he sustained strategic decisions for decades. Such continuity requires emotional maturity to handle criticism, pressure, and solitude. The warning that emerges from this comparison is simple and profound. Success does not automatically teach a man how to live well. It amplifies whatever already exists within him. When there is clarity, purpose, and responsibility, it elevates. When these elements are absent, it exposes weaknesses. This is the lesson that crosses centuries. The true risk is not in the desire to grow, but in growing without discipline, without self-mastery, and without attention to consequences. At this point, wisdom ceases to be a concept and becomes practical protection, capable of sustaining an entire life with dignity and direction. Historians of power often agree on one essential point: power does not create character, it reveals it. This idea runs through centuries of historical study and appears repeatedly in serious analyses of leadership and decline. British historian Lord Acton summarized this understanding by stating that power tends to corrupt when it encounters no internal restraints, not because it transforms the man, but because it removes external limits that once concealed his weaknesses. This reading is reinforced by Paul Johnson, a contemporary historian known for analyzing the private lives of great intellectual leaders. In his work, Intellectuals, Johnson demonstrates that brilliant men rarely failed for lack of intelligence, but for absence of personal discipline, self-mastery, and emotional maturity. For him, power amplifies existing patterns. Where there is clarity and responsibility, it strengthens. Where there are inner concessions, it accelerates the fall. This observation helps explain why Solomon X. Bill Gates, the success that elevates and the warning no one teaches, is not merely a historical comparison, but a practical reflection on choices and consequences in any era. Solomon lived in a time when power was visible, concentrated, and absolute. His wisdom was tested as his influence grew. In biblical accounts, the problem was never prosperity itself, but the weakening of self-mastery. When inner discipline loses strength, choices become guided by comfort rather than purpose. Consequences arise slowly, almost imperceptibly, until they become inevitable. In the contemporary world, power has taken on more discrete forms, yet none less profound. Bill Gates did not rule by decrees, but by decisions that shaped how people work, learn, and communicate. Historian Niall Ferguson, studying economic empires and modern leaders, observes that sustainable power requires clear internal limits. In his work on global influence, Ferguson points out that when powerful men begin to operate solely by efficiency and lose moral clarity, invisible tensions arise that compromise focus, consistency, and judgment. Philosopher and sociologist Max Weber had already warned that all enduring authority requires internal legitimacy, not merely external. This legitimacy is born from coherence between values and actions. When that coherence breaks, inner conflicts emerge that affect discernment and stability. A mature masculine mindset recognizes this risk and understands that governing systems first requires governing impulses. Contemporary studies on male behavior show that many personal collapses do not come from great failures, but from the accumulation of small concessions. Addictions take root when a man loses discipline over daily habits. Pornography, in particular, appears in research as a factor that compromises focus, self-mastery, and emotional clarity. Abandoning this habit is not treated as moralism, but as a strategic choice to preserve mental energy and life direction. Overcoming it requires responsibility and awareness of consequences. Solomon warned that the human heart tends to scatter when it is not watched. This observation echoes modern neuroscience studies showing how excessive stimuli reduce the capacity for deep attention. Gates, known for intense periods of focused reading, has always defended distraction-free environments to sustain complex decisions. In both cases, focus appears as a tool for protecting character. Another decisive element is consistency. Yuval Noah Harari, when analyzing major historical structures, states that societies and individuals decline when they lose the internal narratives that guide their choices. Without purpose, success becomes empty. With purpose, it turns into ongoing responsibility. Solomon saw his position as service. Gates redefined his role by directing resources toward global challenges, seeking to align influence with a broader sense of meaning. This reflection leads to a central point. Success tests character before it rewards it. It amplifies virtues and weaknesses in equal measure. When clarity, discipline, and emotional maturity are present, it elevates. When these elements fail, it exacts a silent price. History teaches that there is no neutral growth. Every rise demands conscious choices and a willingness to deal with consequences. It is in this space that wisdom stops being discourse and becomes daily practice, sustaining a life guided by purpose and self-mastery over time. Throughout history, there has always been a moment when the study of great men stopped being merely external analysis and began to function as a mirror. Philosophers like Socrates insisted that an unexamined life was not worth living. This idea has endured for centuries because it points to a sensitive truth. The real confrontation does not happen between men, but within each one. It is there that responsibility and clarity cease to be concepts and begin to demand real positioning. When Solomon wrote about wisdom, he was not speaking only to kings. His texts deal with ordinary choices, daily habits, and inevitable consequences. The warning was simple. Without discipline, even the most promising man loses his way. Modern researchers of human behavior confirm this logic. Studies in self-control psychology show that small, repeated decisions shape destiny more than isolated major events. Quiet consistency builds character, daily neglect corrodes it. Bill Gates, when reflecting on success, has always highlighted the importance of focus. In interviews and writings, he stated that the ability for deep concentration separates those who move forward from those who merely react to their environment. This observation is supported by neuroscience research showing how fragmented attention reduces mental clarity and compromises decisions. Where there is no focus, impulsive choices emerge. Where impulsive choices exist, consequences are not slow to appear. Mature masculine thinking begins when a man accepts that no one escapes his own routine. Self-knowledge is not abstract introspection, but practical honesty about habits, limits, and deviations. Researchers like Roy Baumeister have shown that self-control works like a muscle. When it is not exercised, it weakens. In that weakening, addictions find space. Among them, pornography appears in studies as a factor that undermines discipline, distorts rewards, and reduces emotional maturity. Abandoning this habit is not a moralistic gesture, but a strategic decision to recover focus and consistency. Solomon warned that the human heart tends to follow the easiest path when it is not watched. This ancient observation echoes current scientific articles showing how the brain seeks shortcuts of immediate pleasure. The question that arises, then, is not accusatory, but revealing. Which habits are being repeated without reflection? Which choices are being made when no one is watching? Wisdom begins when these questions are no longer ignored. Stoic philosophers like Epictetus stated that true freedom is to govern desires, not to satisfy them. This idea helps explain emotional maturity as the ability to endure temporary discomfort in the name of a greater purpose. Bill Gates reorganized his life when he realized that success without clear direction generates wear and exhaustion. Solomon recorded similar regret when he recognized that excess produces emptiness. In both cases, the lesson is direct. Purpose sustains discipline, and discipline protects purpose. Every life produces results. Nothing remains neutral. Responsibility means recognizing that choices build consequences, even when they seem small. Consistency does not require heroism, only fidelity to what strengthens. Success that elevates begins within, long before it becomes visible. The warning no one teaches also starts there. When clarity, self-mastery, and focus are treated as optional, the cost appears later. History shows that whole men are not those who never fall, but those who choose direction before the fall becomes inevitable. When observing trajectories like those of Solomon and Bill Gates, it becomes clear that success has never been a universal concept. Historians and psychologists agree that it takes different forms depending on values, context, and emotional maturity. For some, success is public recognition. For others, it is freedom, stability, or peace. Wisdom begins with clarity about this personal definition. Without it, a man risks pursuing goals that sustain neither purpose nor real satisfaction over time. Solomon achieved everything many desire, yet recorded that not every achievement produces lasting meaning. Bill Gates, after decades at the center of economic and technological power, redefined his own notion of success by reorganizing priorities. Both demonstrate that responsibility grows in proportion to influence. The higher one rises, the greater the demand for self-mastery and consistency. The warning emerges precisely there. When success is confused with accumulation, a man begins to lose clarity about himself. Researchers in existential psychology state that a lack of self-knowledge turns achievements into sources of anxiety. Without emotional maturity, success amplifies insecurities instead of resolving them. It is in this scenario that addictions often take hold. Pornography, cited in several studies, appears as a common escape when focus and discipline weaken. Abandoning these habits does not occur through external imposition, but through conscious choice in light of consequences. A man seeking success must decide what strengthens his life and what fragments it. Historian Niall Ferguson observes that empires and careers decline when they lose internal criteria. The absence of clear limits leads to dispersion. Solomon warned that excess demands a silent price. Gates acknowledged that poor decisions arise when the mind loses focus. These examples converge on a simple point. Success requires constant inner governance. Without daily discipline, even good opportunities become sources of wear. The warning that remains is direct, though rarely taught. Seeking success without defining values is walking without a map. Choices made without clarity produce consequences that accumulate over the years. Mature masculine thinking accepts that no one builds something lasting without consistency. Recognition, money, and freedom endure only when aligned with purpose and responsibility. At this point, the need for something practical emerges. Understanding the risk is not enough. Action with method is required. History shows that men who regain focus and discipline do so not through momentary inspiration, but through simple strategies applied consistently. There are objective paths to strengthen wisdom, organize choices, and avoid common traps of modern failure. These paths promise no shortcuts, but they offer clear direction for those who have decided to build something that goes beyond immediate self-interest and leaves marks that endure beyond one's own existence. The history of men who sustained success over time reveals a simple pattern. They did not rely on impulse, but on method. Solomon recorded principles. Bill Gates applied systems. The first concrete strategy begins with a personal definition of success. Without this clarity, all effort fragments. Studies in motivational psychology show that men who do not know what they seek confuse movement with progress. Defining success requires writing, with precision, what one wishes to preserve: stability, freedom, recognition, peace, or contribution. This definition guides choices and reduces future regret. The second strategy is structuring visible discipline into daily routine. Discipline is not extreme rigidity, but minimum predictability. Research in human behavior indicates that fixed times for sleeping, working, and reflecting strengthen self-mastery. Solomon warned that internal disorder precedes external failure. Gates organized blocks of time for deep reading and strategic decisions. A clear routine protects focus and reduces impulsive decisions, creating consistency even on difficult days. The third strategy is interrupting habits that drain mental energy. Neuroscience studies show that constant stimuli weaken sustained attention. Pornography, treated in research as a habit with high emotional impact, compromises focus, discipline, and emotional maturity. Abandonment does not occur through repression, but through conscious substitution. Reducing artificial stimuli and investing time in reading, exercise, and silence restores clarity. This choice strengthens responsibility and prevents invisible consequences that emerge over the long term. The fourth strategy is practicing action-oriented self-knowledge. This is not vague introspection, but practical analysis. Researchers recommend simple weekly reviews. Which choices strengthened the week and which weakened it? Where was there consistency and where were concessions made? Solomon wrote that the wise man observes his paths. Gates maintained constant evaluations of projects and decisions. This habit turns mistakes into learning and prevents the repetition of failures. The fifth strategy is thinking about legacy before immediate comfort. Historians like Paul Johnson show that men who build something lasting make uncomfortable decisions in the short term. Asking whether a choice contributes to something that will outlive time reshapes priorities. Solomon wrote for generations. Gates invested in long-range solutions. Focusing on legacy reorganizes purpose, discipline, and responsibility, creating peace even under pressure. These strategies promise no shortcuts. They demand consistency and emotional maturity. Studies on adult development confirm that men who assume personal responsibility reduce relapses into addiction and strengthen mental clarity. Success that elevates is not born of intense motivation, but of simple choices repeated with intention. The warning remains: without focus, discipline, and self-mastery, even good opportunities become traps. With method, clarity, and purpose, growth stops being accidental and becomes sustainable, building something that does not disappear when applause fades or when circumstances change over time. When placing Solomon and Bill Gates side by side, history reveals something that transcends eras. Success is not the end of the journey, it is its most demanding test. Both reached rare levels of influence, yet left clear signs that the real challenge is not going far, but remaining whole. Ancient wisdom and modern power converge on a simple truth: without inner clarity, every achievement becomes unstable. Solomon recorded that prosperity without purpose generates emptiness. Gates demonstrated that impact without personal limits exacts a silent cost. These paths show that responsibility grows alongside opportunity. Where there is discipline, self-mastery, and consistency, success elevates. Where these pillars fail, it exposes fragilities. This is not about condemning ambition, but about directing it towards something that does not fade with time. Mature, masculine thinking understands that choices build consequences, even when no one is watching. The focus is not on avoiding mistakes at all costs, but on learning to govern oneself before trying to govern circumstances. Self-knowledge turns falls into adjustment. Purpose turns effort into direction. Discipline turns intention into results. This is the kind of success that does not depend on applause and does not collapse when circumstances change. In the end, the question that remains is not who was more successful, but which path produces peace, freedom, and something that remains worthwhile when the noise fades. History answers clearly. Success that elevates is born within and sustained by simple choices, repeated with responsibility over time. If this reflection brought clarity, it is worth continuing. Sharing ideas like these strengthens men who seek discipline, focus, and real purpose. Subscribing, commenting, or reflecting on which choice needs adjustment today may be the first step toward building something that truly lasts.